Iron Woman, the sequel to The Iron Man by Ted Hughes. Chapter 1. School was over and the Easter holidays had begun. Lucy was walking home between the reed banks along the marsh road when it started to happen. She had just come to the small bridge where the road goes over the deep drain. She called this Otterfest Bridge because once she'd seen an otter on the edge of it, over the black water, eating an eel. There had been 3 years before, but she still felt excitement whenever she got to this part of the road, and she would always look ahead eagerly towards the bridge. Today, as usual, the bridge was empty. As she crossed over it, she looked between the rails into the black water. She always did this, just in case there might be an otter down there in the water looking up at her, or maybe swimming beneath her at that very moment. And today, there was something. But what was it down there in the water? She leaned over the rail and peered. Something deep in the dark water, something white, kept twisting. A fish? Suddenly she knew it was an eel, behaving in the strangest way. At first she thought it must be 2 eels fighting, but no, it was just one eel. It knotted itself and unknotted, then it swam quickly around in circles, corkscrewing over and over as it went. At one point its tail flipped right through the water. There it was, writhing down into the mud, settling a grey, cloudy drifting. Then it was up on the surface again, bobbing its head into the air. She saw its beaky face, then its little mouth opening, and she saw the pail inside of its mouth. There it was, writhing and trembling in a knot. Quite a small eel, only a foot long. As it danced its squirmy, circling, darting dance, it was drifting along in the current of the drain. Soon she lost sight of it under the watershine. Then, 20 yards downstream, she saw its head bob up again. Then a swirl, then it vanished. Then up again, bob, bob, bob. What was wrong with it? Seeing its peculiar head bobbing up like that and its little mouth opening, she felt a painful twist somewhere in her middle. She'd wanted to stop the eel and help it. It needed help. Something was wrong with it. At that moment, staring along the dimpled shine of the drain, where it curved away among the tall reeds, she felt something else. At first, she had no idea what made her head go dizzy and her feet stagger. She gripped onto the bridge rail and braced her feet apart. She thought she had felt the rail itself give her a hand jolt. What was it? Garronk, garronk, garak! The floppy, untidy shape of a heron was scrambling straight out of the reed beds. It did not flap away in stately slow motion like an ordinary heron. It failed and hoisted itself up, exactly as if it were bounding in an invisible spiral stair. Then, from a great height, it tumbled away towards the sea, beyond the marsh. Something had scared it badly. But what? Something in the marsh had frightened it. And seeing the heron so frightened Lucy. The marsh was always a lonely place, and now she felt the loneliness. As she stood there looking up, the whole bluish and pinky sky of soft cloud moved slowly. She looked again along the drain, where the reeds lead all along, bowing gently in the light wind. The eel was no longer to be seen. Was it still writhing and bobbing its head about? As the slow flow carried it way through the marsh, she looked down into the drain, under the bridge. The black water moved silently, crumbling and twirling like halls of light. Then it came back. Beneath her feet, the bridge road jumped, and the rail jarred her hand. At the same moment, the water surface of the drain was blurred by a sudden mesh of tiny ripples all over it. An earthquake! It must be an earthquake. A completely new fear gripped Lucy. For a second, she did not dare move. She thought of the bridge collapsing, and her dropping into the drain with its writhing eels was bad enough. But the thought of the marsh itself opening a great crack found herself all the water and mud and eels and reeds pouring into the bottomless black. Maybe right into the middle of the earth was worse. She felt her toes curling like claws and the soles of her feet prickling with electricity. Quickly she began the walk, but it was like walking on bouncy, narrow plank between skyscrapers. She lifted each foot carefully and set it down firmly, and yet gently, as fast as she dared, and yet quite slow. But soon she couldn't help it. She started running. What if the earthquake shook and brought the ceiling down on her mother, or even shaken the village flat like dominoes? And what if the great towering piece of machinery at the factory had toppled over on her father? And then, as she ran, it came again, pitching her off her balance as her left foot hit her right calf, and down she went. As she lay there, flat and winded, it came again. This time the road seemed to hit her chest and stomach, a strong, hard thump. Then another, and each time she saw the road gravel under her face jump slightly. And it was then, as she lay there, that she heard the weirdest sound. Nothing like any bird she'd ever heard. It came out from the marsh behind her. It was a long, wailing cry like a fire engine siren. She jumped up and began to run blindly. Already the head was out. It didn't look like a head, simply a gigantic black lump crowned with reeds and steaming with mud. But the mouth was clear, and after the first wailing cry, the lips began moving like a crab, spitting out mud and roots. Half an hour passed before the lump moved again. As it moved, the reeds away to either side of it urged its head upwards and heaved. The black, watery mud steamed through them. The mouth opened and a long, booming groan came out. As the head hoisted clear, another groan became a wailing roar. A seagull blowing across the mouth like a paper scrap veered widely upwards as the steam-shaped reared in front of him like a sudden dark wall of a cliff. Rooty lumps of reeds and black snakes squirmed, and waterfalls flapped their foreprints, blinking their eyes and squealing as they fell. The black shape was the size of 2 or 3 elephants. It looked like a hippopotamus-headed gigantic dinosaur, dragging itself up on all fours out of the prehistoric tar pit. But now, still like a dinosaur, it sat upright. And all at once it looked human, immense but human. Great hands clawed at the head, flinging away scratches of muddy reeds. Then, amid gurglings and sucklings, and with a groaning wail, the thing stood erect, a truly colossal, man-shaped statue of black mud, taking itself, groaning, towering over the lonely marsh. And about half a mile away, a bird watcher was bent over a bird's nest, holding a dead bittern and feeling the cold eggs on which the dead bird had been sitting. From his height, only 10 feet away, he had been watching this bird all day, waiting for the eggs to hatch. He knew the chicks were overdue. When those first quakes had come, shuddering his camera on his tripod, he told himself they were distant quarry blastings, and he guessed the strange wailing must become signs of factory siren. He knew there was a big factory outside the town, only 2 or 3 miles away. What else could be such a thing? And when that second booming wail had come, he had just seen something far more startling. He stared through his binoculars. 2 big blowflies were inspecting the eye of the bittern of the nest. With a shock, he realised the bird was dead already, a dead bird. This was more important than any noises, so he waded over and lifted the dead mother from her eggs. He was horrified. She was quite stiff. And it was then, as he stood there, thinking that must take this bird and her eggs to be examined by some scientist to find out who had killed them. It was then the third wail came, far louder than the earlier ones. At this same moment, the marsh shook. Like a vast jelly, he thought. An earthquake! Maybe that's the siren wailing. He had made his hide on the edge of some higher ground that stuck out from the marsh and the road. Big bushy willow trees behind him blocked his view of what had terrified the heron and the seagull. But he was alarmed enough by the idea of an earthquake. Cradling the cold eggs in one hand and the dead bird tucked in his other arm, he collected his camera and returned to the car park among the willows. As he opened the car door, another jolt shook it. He drove along, out past the grassy ruts of the road, not far from the bridge where Lucy had stood, watching the eel, and he turned right towards the town. His eyes widened and his brain whirled. The swaying, lumpy, black tower, about 100 yards ahead, close to the road, could not possibly be anything, unless it was some structure for aerial, something to do with radar maybe, draped in camouflage. Even when it moved, he was still trying to explain it. Maybe it was a windmill without arms being moved, or they move whole houses in America, or maybe some film company was making a film, a horror film, it could be that. And he would account for the hideous noises too. He simply did not know what to think, so he went on driving towards it. But when it stepped out on the road directly in front of him, he jammed on his brakes. This, he could see, was something new. This had come up all on its own out of the marsh mud. Clumps of tangles of reeds and slithered down its black lawn with slime. As it dawned on him what he was looking at, his head seemed to freeze. This was his hair trying to stand on end. Tears of pure fear began to pour down his cheeks. But the photographer, and no true photographer could ever miss a chance, he bundled his camera with him out of the car, snatched off his lens cover, and bowed over to find his viewfinder. Blackness filled it. He backed away, swinging the camera from side to side, trying to squeeze the whole huge shape into the frame. But even before it got full length, he saw in his viewfinder that it picked up his car. But also overjoyed, he took shot after shot as this great figure slammed his car down on the road, raised it high and slammed it down again, and again, like someone trying to beat the dust out of a heavy rug. The birdwatcher remembered with a fleeting pang the bird's eggs. They had been nested in the cap on the passenger seat, but he forgot them as he saw the paint and glass exploding like steam. Each time he banged the car on the road, doors flew off, wheels bounded into the reeds, and the mouth in the head opened. As the terrible siren wailed out came from the mouth, the birdwatcher turned and ran. Fast as he ran, he wasn't fast enough. The black, mad giant bounced and twisted steel-bright tin can of a car into the reeds, then gorged up a handful of marsh mud clotted with weedy roots. The birdwatcher thought the swamp must have caught up with him and kicked him, but it was the mass of mud that slammed him from behind, wrapping him and swept him many yards along the road. He struggled out of it, and clutching his greasy camera, spitting out the black, foul mire and sodden, he ran for his life. When she reached home, Lucy found everything as usual. Her mother had felt no jots or tremors. She had no idea what her daughter was talking about. Later that evening, her father came home. He told of a bad smash, and there had been a road on the marsh road. A birdwatcher had lost control of his car and gone off the road. He'd gone off his head too. He came to the village post office, jabbering all kinds of madness. Police had driven him back into town where he was staying. Car, a total wreck. Funniest thing, every speck of paint had gone off it, and the road was one mess. It looked as if it hit the sound barrier. Bit of a mystery. Listening to this, Lucy wondered what kind of madness the birdwatcher had been jabbering. Maybe those shocks had jounced him off the road and out of his wits at the same moment. She kept remembering the horrifying, wailing cry. What was going on in the marsh? As she sat there at the table, she watched her arms go goose-pimpled. Then she began to think of the twisting eel. That is the end of chapter 1.